Welcome back to my Twitch series on live TDD. Live with all the problems, all the mistakes. You can see, one of the things I hope people get out of watching me code is to see how I stumble on basic things and I need help, because I'm not like some mystical programmer who happened to write a book. I think I'm just stubborn about this stuff. Like, I really believe in test-driven development and extreme programming, and I'm stubborn. But that doesn't mean I'm a better programmer than you are. That means maybe I have some things to offer you. You also have things to offer me. Welcome to Mystical Oracle, Paweł from Poland. Glad to have you. Thanks for joining. I'm glad your schedule allowed. And welcome Mudshark. A few other folks have joined. The Mystical Oracle has a few AppCode questions, and let's just take those. Why wait? And Hop Solo. All the usual suspects. But yeah, hit me up with AppCode questions. Let's see where they go. We'll get this bit of lag between, my broadcasting and your receiving and your typing. That's okay. No worries. I'll just sip my coffee, which you've seen from my favorite Father's Day mug. Actually, I don't know if it was Father's Day, but it was a gift from my son, and I really appreciate it. So one of the main things about AppCode is, as folks have pointed out, as Paweł has observed, is the importance of bumping the memory. Perhaps I should remind you of that. In Edit, Custom VM Options, under the Help menu of AppCode. Come here, and it's good to bump these up. MS and MX are your memory settings, and what AppCode ships with is just too small for Swift. Actually, even with Objective-C, I'm trying to remember, it's been a while. Even with Objective-C, I think at least on big projects like real life, real work, commercial apps that you get paid for, it really needs to be doubled. Okay, let's see what the Mystical Oracle has. I have a project which uses a lot of dev pods to keep the app modular. Cool. In Xcode, I am able to run the whole test suite of apps in one go. In AppCode and configurations, I cannot use the main project as a test target, just per dev pod target. Yes. Okay. This is something I've run into. I know what you mean. Basically, to explain for folks, that schemes and Xcode's schemes are different from AppCode's configurations. In AppCode, you set up a configuration for tests, and you run it. Here, I can run the survey, or I can run all tests, or it's sort of remembered a couple of others. And how then do you have it where in Xcode you could keep adding, test targets and keep running more and more schemes? I mean, more test targets in one scheme. This is something I've wrestled with, and I think, what have I done before? Let's see what we have here. I think I've done something like this, where I create a compound configuration to run multiple configurations. That looks familiar and suspicious. And there's not much I can tell you about this, but it sure looks like this, doesn't it? I mean, there we go. Yeah. So this looks like you can create a compound configuration to run many different things and string them all together. All right. So I hope that is helpful. I'm going to get rid of it. I never created it. Okay. So, and hit me up with any others, questions, Pavel? You can also hit me as you go. This goes for other folks watching, especially if you are new here. I'd love to entertain, take your questions of any kind relating to, you know, what kind of tooling do I have to use? Yeah, no problem, Paul. As you come up with them, as you think of them, you can ask me here. I can explain. I think it's probably easier to hear me explain rather than have to type back and forth on Twitter. But you can also, of course, hit me on Twitter. Let's see. All right. So where were we? I actually reverted some changes I made because it's like, gosh darn it, this thing feels like it's so close. But in the process of trying to string together, where's main? String together the actual components and run the actual data through this, it crashed. It crashed. Yesterday we spent like we went overtime and spent like around half an hour debugging the problem. That was annoying. And one thing I was asking myself was why did I discover that so late? And the answer is I don't have CI set up. I am running my tests off in here. I'll show you my project setup. My tests are running over Survey Core, which is where I have most of my code. And then main is just where I string things together. I don't have any tests on that, but main is where things were crashing. Now, if I had set up maybe a complex configuration to run both the tests and main, I would have spotted it sooner because the problem was in our regular expressions. And in fact, that's something else. But I'm rushing ahead of myself. Too many thoughts. So the problem was I don't have this running in a place where when I check in code, it runs all the things. Maybe I should set up a configuration to run stuff. Although right now we know it crashes. And we have a crashing test. Let me run tests to see it die. And this comes from our, where was it? It's not split entries. Here. And this is yucky code. Clearly, this is yucky code. This is gross code that was never cleaned up, and it's only partially correct. Now, what this is crying out for is that it's doing way too much work in the initializer now. It used to be very simple. Now it's doing too much work. And what we need is a sanitizer of some kind. So I'm going to make some notes here. So this is one thing. I need a sanitizer. And the other thing, just to keep notes is that I started to say, okay, process the survey and now print out the problems by looping over them and maybe printing the first 10. Well, that got to be a lot of code too. So we're missing some means of pretty printing. Because main should have very little in it. It should just join pieces together. So that's 2 steps. Okay, so I have a reminder to myself. Let's make sure you can see those as well. Okay. So I think what I'd like to do is disable this before I get to Mudshark's proposed solution around the regular expressions. I think I want to pick this up and move it into a sanitizer. And probably the sanitizer should be outside of the weighted entries. I'm not sure. Like, you know, part of the pipeline. And actually, one of the things that this does is drop the first line. Where does it do that? I'm not quite sure where it does that, but it drops the first line because that's my my column headers, and that's also sanitizing. So this really is a new domain concept that was previously implicit, and we're making it explicit. This is one of the big things, whether you're doing object-oriented programming or you're doing functional programming, it doesn't matter. They're kind of the same under the hood anyway, even though they're very, like, they look at the world very differently. But either way, we want to try to get closer to domain-driven design, where our code expresses domain concepts explicitly rather than having them buried in a bunch of code. So for object-oriented programming, we need objects that do the work. For functional programming, we need functions that do the work. Well-named things. So let me take this debug test, and for now, let's disable it. And let's see if okay, I still have TCR on. If you're new here, haven't seen the last couple of sessions, TCR is like a more extreme version of TDD, where you run the tests, and if they pass, it auto-commits, and if they fail, it reverts. I have opted for a softer version of TCR that does not revert my test code or the approved artifacts from approval testing, which is another thing that if you're new here, well, you'll get to see it hopefully. So let's disable that and run the tests, and that should check in. I predict that this will pass, and it checked in something, but it repeats the last commit message for this TCR plugin. So let me change this to TCR Sanitizer. That's what we want to do. Okay, so we're green, which means we can move things around, change things. And the problem is this is also going to change behavior. If I extract it, let's extract it first and run it inside of the initializer, and then I'll pull it out possibly. All right, so how do we do this? We take a comma separated entry and we get a bunch of stuff out of it. Let's see if I just do an extract method. Let's check to see what we get. Okay, so that looks good. It's taking, what I'm looking at is the signature to see what arguments does it take and what does it return. And if it's just spitting back a string, that's pretty good. I forget where that dropping of the first. That's in the splitter? Yes. Split entries does the dropping of the first, the label column. And that's really like a sanitizing step, except one takes multiple lines and one takes single lines. Not sure what to do. But let's start by extracting this. Call it sanitize. Sanitize the input. And it's not liking it because I can't call a method before everything is initialized. All these things that it's initializing. But I could make it a static. Let's see if this is okay. Okay, it passes, which means it committed. If it failed, it would revert. In fact, if I change something here just to demonstrate, like if I mess up my columns and say 3 to 5, not 3 to 6, and I run tests, that should just pop back to 3 to 6 with a little notification. Oh, it also failed some approval tests saying the results have changed. And here's our notification that things were reverted. Let me run again just to get back to green. I mean, it is in green, but I don't like operating with failures still present, even though maybe that's something I can get rid of, a step I can avoid. But you see that with good microtests, they are fast. That is one of the things that you really want to get out of microtests, which are maybe a better word for unit testing, is that they are fast. I've seen some unit tests that are horrendous. They're unit tests, but they're slow. I've also seen other tests that are super fast and give good feedback, but it's like, it's more than a unit. I don't care. I just want fast. All right, so it's all in this sanitizer, and maybe that's okay, but I kind of wish I could test this by itself. Maybe I should pull it out into a freestanding function and not have it be inside of anything. Why don't we start with that? Let's pull it out. Welcome to some new viewers. And glad to have you. If Where in the world are you? That's always fun to see because folks are from all over. We have somebody from Poland. I'm in California in the United States. We've got Denmark. Welcome. Mudshark, I'm trying to remember. Were you in... I've forgotten where you are. And Sweden. Yeah, okay. I should have just said it. Hey, someone from my neighborhood, San Francisco. Welcome to Mexico. This is exciting. So many new folks. Thanks for speaking up. It's fun for me. I appreciate it. Even if you know, split after a few minutes and say, I've seen enough. Glad you stopped by. All right, let's move this. Okay, one more AppCode question. How do you set a default commit template with Arlo's notation? So that's not really an AppCode thing. I can demonstrate that by making a change. Let's say I go like sanitize. And it's hard to see my the built-in terminal here, but my other terminal is going to be small, the one I usually use. But at least it's got colors you can see. I'm using fish shell, which is superior to Z shell. And if I git add and I git commit without a message, you will see it also pops up with a reminder for me of Arlo's git notation. And where do I do this? Let me reset hard head and let's have a look. Where is it? You know, I think it's in my git config. Let's see. Here's git config message. Git commit message. The question is whether anything is reading that I set up or whether that's actually built into Git. Let's find out. Git commit message template. Okay, so it looks like you put the file wherever you like, name it what you like, and then set it in your git config like that. I did specialize I took Arlo's commit notation and I think I found one somewhere and then tweaked it a bit to my liking. I should share that with folks. So let me just make a reminder to myself. This is super handy. I think I've come to like it because the main idea is that it categorizes your commits by risk. If you do something that's, for example, you're just changing documentation, well, then that gets a lowercase letter because that's safe. If you're changing something that's validated by tests, then that gets an uppercase letter. As soon as something is risky, it's an uppercase bang bang. And then here's also maybe something I should note, that if something is broken, you ought to star it. All right. So a question from Stefan: why do I use AppCode over Xcode? That is a very good question. And the answer is that AppCode has more tools. First, it has better refactoring. It supports caller creates refactoring. By that, that's not really refactoring, it's generating code. By that I mean, if I, for example, create a new type, I can't think of a name, so I'm just going to call it new type, like that, and I start writing it as if it existed, then, and this will be familiar if you've used any other IDE, like Eclipse or IntelliJ, to be able to say, okay, now create a new type. Do I want it in a new file? Do I want it nested in the struct? And then it asks, like, well, what do I want? A class, a struct. I have yet to use actors and enum. That is part of what I like. I also really like having plugins. Remember when Xcode used to have plugins? AppCode has a world of plugins, including many that I just look up on IntelliJ and find things. For example, this plugin to do test and commit or revert. Other plugins I use are, let's see, I have a plugin. Okay, here's a quick tour, especially for Pavel. Plugins I like. I like using Dash for documentation, so there's a plugin to show Dash quickly. Key Promoter is a plugin to say, you know, you just clicked on something, but there's a shortcut for that, and it pops up a reminder to say, you've done this a few times now, maybe you ought to learn your keystrokes. Limited Whip, you've seen. Mob is an integrated plugin for doing Git handover using mob.sh, except it's built in. So instead of having to go to the terminal and say mob start, mob next, I can just come down here. Oh, I guess that's just a status thing. It's not running right now. But there's a command to mob start, mob next, and automatically if I'm on Zoom, it would be like, oh, you're starting to drive. Let's call a little key sequence, which I've set up so that it automatically shares my Zoom screen. What else do we have here? Presentation Assistant is what shows shortcut commands that I type so that you can see them. This is very important when you're doing screen sharing. Swift Teardown Inspection for AppCode. I've loved this. Unfortunately, it is out of date and is not currently working. What this would do is go through and say, you need to tear things down in your tests, and actually would generate the code to do so. It was a brilliant thing written by Sean Henry, who also wrote a blog post about it on quality coding. I don't know if he will update it or if I need to take it over and learn how to write an AppCode plugin. SwiftLint, built-in support. What else do I have here that's enabled? You can see Markdown inline. You can have integrated scripts. You can do YAML editing. GitHub. Code with Me is another sharing thing that I haven't used lately because it requires somebody else on an IntelliJ IDE. I mean, JetBrains IDE. A few more that look like they are built in. Grammar checks. IDE trainer. That could be, this one could be good for folks who are coming from Xcode. All right. Go check out the IDE features trainer. It is built in, and figure out, it will basically walk you through a project. Oh boy, Pavel's scoring here. You can have a thing that checks that your copyright header is consistent across your source files, and terminal. So I can get to terminal, not just anywhere, but within the project directory, just by doing that. Okay, wow. This became AppCode lesson. I don't think we're going to get beyond the sanitizer today because I like to keep these to an hour. Okay, we'll keep going. All right. Hope that was helpful. And anyway, let's get back to this. So I want to have a sanitizer with I'm not sure that I want it inside a type, but let's pull this into a new file. Yeah, feel free to ask me questions anytime on Twitter. There's no sanitizer type, but I'm just going to stick it into a file here and take off the private, and it no longer needs to be static. And let's see if this, I mean, this should build, but I'm going to run tests as my cheating way, not cheating, I'm using TCR, of saying, let's move in small steps. So first, okay, here's something. What I'm doing is a refactoring technique called parallel change. We have, I use a different color. Hopefully you can see purple. We have code that's running here through the current sanitize thing. That's the old code. I want to shift it somewhere else. So what I'm doing is I'm laying down the new code in parallel. That's the first thing I did. Next thing I'm going to do is have, I'm following, if I'm going to be really strict about this, I'm going to follow Martin Fowler's steps to say have the old code call the new code. Let's do that. Xcode now have most of it built in. Switch back to Xcode from AppCode. Xcode is getting better. I'm happy. I do use Xcode from time to time. Especially, there's still a project I work on that makes AppCode cry, just because it's too heavy, and we're in the process of breaking it up into smaller modules so that we can work with it. But yeah, hey, use whatever works for you. So this worked. So now let's, as part of really trying to move in small steps, how do I can't call sanitize because it has the same name. All right, let's change the name to sanitize 2. Nothing is calling it yet, so I can just change it. And now here, let's call sanitize 2. And delete all that. And run tests again, which will auto commit because I'm using TCR. Now I can go to where this is called and say, let's just directly call the new thing. So I'm continuing to shift from old to new, and that didn't work? No, it did work. I just have a ghost error there. Once with parallel change, you've got the old stream, you lay down the new stream, you shift everything gradually in as small steps as you can to the new stream. Once nothing is calling the old stream, which I can verify by seeing that there's no callers, then I can safely delete the old. And that is a classic repeated refactoring technique. So let's do that. And now I can rename this. In fact, I don't like having input as a named parameter. Okay, so now I'm going to show off an AppCode thing. There are not as many refactorings as you might think, but it's still better than Xcode. In particular, change signature. I can say, and let me try to do this with keystrokes. No, come back. Okay, enter, and I can now cut this from the name, from the external name, and paste it as an internal name. And you see now the external name is unnamed. And when you hold down the Option key, you see it, AppCode adds underscores to certain things to say this keystroke will do something like look down here. Oh wait, you can't see that. Can you? There you go. If you look down here, you see when I hold down the Option key, refactor, the R is underlined, and that means I can hit Option R and do that. Yeah, Xcode does renaming, but not as well. It's getting better, but in my experience, it's not as good. But go for it. Xcode does not have change signature yet. One refactoring that's missing from both is inline. Right, so we've pulled out Sanitize. This is now really gross. Quote stripped 3. I really would like to Command-Shift-N to inline this, but there's no such thing. Sometimes Xcode refactoring fails out of the blue until one closes and opens Xcode. Well, that's a good tip, because I didn't know that. I've seen it, like, say go extract this, and it's just like, no. In fact, I was teaching a class. I do corporate training, no longer from quality coding, but from industrial logic. And I was teaching a class doing the same material for two different groups, one on one day and one on the next day. And the first day, I was like, oh, let me show you how, try to do the Xcode refactoring of extract. And it failed. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people don't know that it's there, partly, I think, because it fails so often. So why bother? But I encourage you, as Xcode users, always reach for the automated refactoring first. If it doesn't work, you'll know quickly, but try it. But what was funny was on day 2, it did work. So lesson learned. Thank you for sharing that sometimes it's helpful to quit Xcode and relaunch it. I want to inline this, so I'm going to do this manually by copying, pasting, running. Now nothing is using that variable, but I'm going to run tests anyway. Good. And then I can delete that. And run tests again. And this is accumulating a set of commits. This has been a fun session. I don't think we're going to get very far. I do want to test the sanitizer. I can test it. It's just a function by itself. I don't think it needs anything. Oh, you know, yes, it does. Look at this gross repeated code. Before I fix it, I kind of want to clean it because I'm afraid if we go for the fix, I'll have to repeat the fix in multiple places. What it's doing here is it's taking, because it's going to do work with comma separated values. Here, I can show you. Inside the survey itself, when somebody wrote a comma in the text, my output to CSV, comma separated values, did the correct thing in that if somebody added a comma inside of a column, it puts that in quotes. But my parsing was very naive and was just breaking on commas, so it would break right here, which is incorrect. So yeah, let's try to bring this maybe under test. It's already being called, it's already being tested, but I'd like to move some tests for it. I don't often do this. If something is already tested, I'm not that interested in focusing tests around it, but I also want to extend it with new behavior, and that's like, that's easier to do in a new test. And this duplication bothers me. I think it is time for a sanitizer type. Correct. So right now the sanitizer removes anything between quotes. You see in this regular expression we have quote, period to match anything, star to repeat, and question mark to be greedy, was it, or not greedy? And I want to add more behavior. Not greedy, yeah, because otherwise it would match if somebody else had written more than one thing that ended up being quoted, it got slurped away. So let me wrap this inside a type. And what I think I can do is if I say, put this inside of an enum as sort of a quasi namespace. What I'm wondering is, can I then have private things inside of there? Or does that even make sense? You know, I don't think so. Let's make it a struct. Because I may want to pull, for example, the regular expression into something, into a property. So let's call it a struct. It's not static. Let's keep it static for now. I'll show you why. I want to move in small steps. So yeah, private static would work, except I have a suspicion that I want properties. So enums are great for quasi namespacing unless you have properties, and I think I may end up with one, so I'm going to start that direction. So this should still pass. And now let's make it not static, so that I need to instantiate it like that. So this is not test-driven development. This is refactoring. But refactoring, TDD is like, I feel like the secret sauce of test-driven development, the reason it's so effective is that it supports refactoring. And refactoring is the secret gem of extreme programming. It is the secret sauce. So now I should be able to say, let's pull this regular expression out into a property. Let's see if I can do that. Tests are running. Tests are already there on this. I can demonstrate that for you by hitting a breakpoint. So basically, everything in here is already tested, but I want to test home. I want a home for tests for this specifically. But as you'll see here, here's a test. Where is it? It's in the setup. It's in the pipeline tests. So it's definitely being called here. It's because it is... the debugger died on me. Because it is being called from the initializer of weighted entry right now, which is probably something I want to change. All the weighted entry tests go through there, and there are here. This is the one that was particular for sanitizing. Is to say, let's say we have input where there's a column with freeform input from actual responses, and then there are keywords that I've assigned to break in the following columns. So let's pretend we have quoted text and quoted text and quoted text, and it should strip those out and actually get the problems, desires, and features. And so this test is exercising the sanitizer. I kind of, it no longer really belongs there, but it is fully tested. Yeah, so I do want to move that. But right now, it's still tested. I'm refactoring. So we'll move that we'll move that around. Let's see here. It might be nice to move it now. I agree. It would be cleaner to move it now. So let's create a sanitizer, a new home for sanitizer tests. To do this, I have template I like. If you go to my blog and come under my big head there, down to the search bar here, what is this? This is actually like my pinned thing of my manifesto. If you haven't seen my manifesto, it's a short little video. And I look for template, and there. So these are the templates. It is designed for Xcode. And Xcode templates, I make the website with WordPress. So Xcode templates, I can use in here by saying, you see here it says file from Xcode template. And another difference about AppCode is that from Xcode is very mouse-centric. It wants you to click things. And sure, you can learn some keystrokes and should learn keystrokes, for example, to show and hide your navigators or your inspectors. But it's still very mouse heavy. Whereas AppCode leans into, let's use the keyboard as much as possible. So if I just hit X, it filters the list. And it's pausing for a second. And here's my template. I'm going to make sure that it goes into survey core tests, but set the target correctly. And this is going to be Sanitizer tests, right? So instead of clicking finish, I'm going to hold down the Option key and see, oh, I can just type F. It takes its best guess at what to import, which is not always correct. My template does, that is. And I run, and this should fail. But because if this were strict TCR, it would revert my test code as well. But we are using a softer test commit revert that leaves the test present for me, which I'm grateful for. So there, it failed. That's what I want. And now I can use this to migrate the weighted entry tests. This one in particular. Let's get this helper here. Test commit gentle revert. My next step should actually be to have to run this and have it pass so that it commits, because I don't want to lose this work. That is the main thing that TCR does, is it, wait a second. I'm not seeing it in here. Uh-oh. I'm seeing, I saw this warning, the file's not in the project target. And I'm like, really? Come on, I've added it. And now I look down here and I'm looking for survey core and I don't see it, because quite often I only show failing tests. Here I can see ignored tests and passing tests, and survey core ought to show up in there, but something is wrong. At this point, I'm going to fire up Xcode. Because working with targets and stuff is easier in Xcode. And something is funny. Where are my survey tests? Where did they go? My sanitizer. Ooh, disappeared? Show and Finder. Where did it go? I know what it did. TCR bit me. There was a change. No, there was a change made in the production code, and that was to the project file. And the test failure said, whoop, my failing test 0 is not a good it's great for TDD, but it's not good for TCR. Right, so if I Command-Shift-O, which is a great Xcode technique, and I look for Sanitizer, it won't be there because it's not in the project. That was my boo-boo. Test 0, which I like so much for TDD, is not TCR friendly. So that's a good thing to learn. Now, another AppCode thing is that here's the project files, just like we saw in Xcode, but you can also see the files themselves, including everything, including things that are not in the project. I don't know if there's an easy way for me to add this to the project from inside of here. There probably is, but at this point I get lazy and I say, let's just use Xcode. And let me open a Finder window. I had the options to add it to the Xcode project. I did not see it. Let's see. You're right. It's right there. Thank you. Sometimes, and see, the warning disappeared. Lovely. Okay, I don't want Xcode hanging around taking up space. Did I not get the test target? Did I do that wrong? Shoot. I'm going to revert and do it again just to make sure. Oh, it didn't revert because there's nothing to revert. Yeah, it did. Okay. Let's do it again. Add to Xcode project. Survey core tests. Thank you. Thank you. All right. And now if I run tests, I should see the Sanitizer tests pop up in with this empty do nothing test in there. There we go. And it committed. Phew. All right. So test 0. It's a little different. I need to remember that going forward. I am at an hour of time now. This has been a really fun session dealing with Xcode, but let's or dealing with the differences around AppCode in particular. But let's move let's move this. I'm going to copy this. Okay. Yeah, good question. And this has confused me also. Why is AppCode code completion case sensitive? Is there an option to do it case insensitive? And my answer is, I don't know. Good question. I don't have an answer. Well, let's find out. All right, so I want to move this helper in here and run tests, and that will commit it. Here you see this shows our Git status there, and boop, the green bar for added lines changed. Now I should be able to bring this test in, but do something a little different. It should, let's not go through weighted entry. Let me just run this so I don't lose it. Okay, and then if I make a system under test as the sanitizer, I'm being paranoid now. and running tests like every step so that I don't lose anything. And now if I say SUT sanitize the input, and this will become the result. Here's another nice thing about AppCode, better than Xcode, is that extract variable suggests a name. In this case, it's not what I want though. It can also say, you know what, make the type explicit or implicit. Ah, now I know. Let's go to Preferences, Editor, Code Completion. When you're searching for things, I can say search for a case there, and it says, you're looking for code completion match case. Thank you, Mudshark. I'm so used to having it on now. I'll look into this later for myself. Let's now, you know what? I have this thing. Let's finish up here in just a minute or two. I have this result. What's the assertion? I'm not doing TDD. I'm doing characterization tests of the existing code here, and I can do this in one line by saying assert equal the result, and this is doing characterization tests manually by saying take a string and compare it to empty string. Why do I do such a thing? I'll show you why. It's because I want to take the existing code and bring it under test quickly. And here's my result. And I can paste that in here and run tests, and this will pass. This is like approvals, except you don't need approvals if it's a small string or a small type. Yep, to get the actual value. So there it is. We have the beginnings of moving this, making this test a home for new tests for new features that I want to add to the sanitizer and fix the bug. But that will be for another day. Hey, maybe tomorrow if you're around. I think that's good for today. Thank you for everyone who came by. Thanks for being active in the chat and asking lots of questions and making suggestions and fixing, catching me in errors. Really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. So good. All right. And I will see you. I'm still off tomorrow, so I'm planning to continue tomorrow. All right? Take care.